Hello and welcome to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. In this second season of the show, host Jorden Guth is joined by a new guest each episode who knows something about hi-fi that Jorden doesn't. And who knows, while he's learning about all of this, you might learn something too. So with no further ado, here's Jorden and this week's guest.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. Today we have Dr. Mark Waldrep, who has decades of experience as an audio engineer, a producer, and champion of high-quality audio reproduction. Today we're hoping to learn more about the audiophile music market and how that's changed over the last few decades. So without further ado, welcome, Dr. Mark Waldrep. Would you like me to call you doctor? Or would you like me to call you Mark?
Mark is certainly, even my students call me Mark.
Oh, there we go.
At least in my presence. I don't know what they call me when they're might be something else.
Well, you've definitely earned the doctor logo with the amount of academia behind audio research specifically, kind of going over your credentials. It's kind of astounding how much knowledge and how much experience you have in the field.
Well, I've been fortunate. I really, I tell my class and anybody who will listen that I feel over the breadth of span of my career and my life, it was the perfect time to learn and understand both the analog production technologies and techniques as a recording engineer for coming near 50 years now, and then having a transition from what was 24-track analog tape machines and analog signal processors and analog reverb chambers and spring reverbs and so forth, because we didn't have digital at all back when, to seeing it now change both the production technologies behind making records and the aesthetics go along with that, and the distribution of that music, which has been traditionally based on physical media, completely shift gears in the last 10, 15, 20 years to the point where it's actually, a non-starter for me to participate in sitting at a table at a trade show and think that I'm going to break even selling physical discs anymore. It's just not the same as it once was. Not that it's any less. The economics have shifted, and the way things are being distributed now, the whole spatial audio thing is a piece of it. High resolution music is a piece of it. But I have really come down to, and based on the YouTube channel that I just recently started, probably within the last month or so, I consolidated a variety of YouTube channels that were dedicated to classical or country or jazz or one of the other formats, genres. And I put it all up under AIX Records. And found out that you need 1,000 subscribers. So I kicked in a blog again, reached out to my community, and within 24 hours, we were over 1,000 subscribers. And so now I'm official YouTube channel partner. Not that means
there you go.
into riches or anything like that, but it's a place that I am placing my entire catalog. I sit here pretty much every day, and in the background, Rita Coolidge is being uploaded to my channel as we speak. To make available the unique catalog that I have. Not only is it unique because it's native high resolution audio recordings, but there's video with all of the productions that I did as well. Not live concert video, but concert or a private concert kind of thing, no audience present. So it seemed like YouTube was the perfect place to put that. I had a Dave Mason track that I did for an EHX convention or conference 2007. It's got almost 200,000, views. People really like to sit there and stream a piece of audio. And if it's got a piece of video with it, all the better. So that's kind of where I'm at these days.
So there's a lot of kind of paths that I could go down in conversation. The one that's kind of jumping off right off the bat is this dematerialization of audio. So if I'm not mistaken, records or LPs were kind of from the 40s, and then we moved into cassette tapes in the 60s, and then it was CDs in the 80s, and kind of past that. Now we started getting into the late 90s and the 2000s, where there was the MP3. Computers made a big push in the home, and then there's streaming. It seems like the progression of YouTube really is taking that streaming idea, but then adding another layer on top of that, adding the video component to kind of enrich that experience further?
Yeah, no, I think other than you've got your decades a little bit shifted here and there, we dealt with lacquer, mono lacquer, although Blumlein had invented stereo back in the early 1930s. We were really, until we hit the microgroove LP in the 50s. We didn't have stereo. So vinyl took over lacquer, 78s and 33 1/3, the microgroove records of the 50s. In the 60s, it was vinyl LPs pretty much. Look, I was a kid in the 60s and I had analog tape, but I was unusual. We did not have cassettes until probably the 70s, something like that.
Okay.
We started being able to walk around with it. The CD didn't come around until 1982. So we were in vinyl and reel-to-reel and cassette tape up until the early 80s, and it didn't take off. The first year of CD sales was less than 10,000 players. It was a remarkable technology, but people were content with their setups, and it wasn't until people really started paying attention to the fact you could get the entire Ninth Symphony. You didn't have to turn records over all the time, and you got this fidelity, quality, and random access, and all these other positives. Not to mention the fact that the audio quality is potentially very, very good, especially now that we've developed the A to D and D to A process to produce and deliver, distribute music of that specification, which is largely called standard resolution audio. CD quality at 44.1 16 bits is the standard by which we then either get high resolution above that or we get lo-fi below that in the MP3 lossy compression world. When the iPod came out, and in the first part of the 2000s rather, then we started dealing with file players. There were file players before the Rio was a file player, but it was really the disruption of Apple and Steve Jobs and the digital files with illegal versions through Napster and mp3.com, and then making legal through the iTunes store, that things started to shift. But at that point, we're dealing with limited bandwidth. We're dealing with compressed files that are lossy, that don't have the full high frequency, don't have the full dynamic range, are compromised to make room for the small pipe that we were pushing stuff through at the time. Now that bandwidth opens up and continues to open up, I mean, the people over at my building now are doing a gigabit up and down into the studio, which was insane. It's expensive, especially on the commercial side of things, business side of things compared to home. But we have the bandwidth now to stream high quality audio and 4K video into our houses and watch any television program at any time, or watch and listen to any audio program at any time. So it was an attempt in 2000 with DVD audio and SAC to sort of replace the CD with things that bragged about higher resolution, better fidelity, or the potential for better fidelity, and surround sound, the ability to have 5.1 surround sound at that point. And neither one of those formats, I was an adherent to the DVD audio specification because 1-bit DSD encoding for SACD is a non-starter for me. I can't tolerate the philosophical bent that we're going to digitize with 1 bit and limit your dynamic range or your frequency range and so forth. But marketing and money have a lot to say. So there are certainly a lot of SACD fans out there. And if something came out on SACD, it was in surround, so be it. That's the way it was. But I created a catalog in 2000 of native high resolution audio recordings, rather than going back into the catalogs as the major labels did, dredging out a 16 or a 24 track analog tape and hiring Elliot Shiner or one of the big shot Grammy winning engineers to remix this stuff in surround. That's old fi. That's lo-fi. That's analog tape. Yes, analog tape can sound great, but every time you take a tape and start from a 24 track, Ken Calais is a good friend. He did the Rumors record. 17 hours they were running the same tapes across heads and wore them out. All the oxide wore away, and they had to transfer the new recordings, the new overdubs against a safety copy of the drums because the drum sound is so dull. So we had these shortcomings that come with the analog formats that you don't have with digital. So I decided I would record a catalog of high-resolution recordings, native high-resolution recordings, which means my equipment at the time, which was obscenely expensive and stayed in the digital domain, was all 96K 24-bit PCM. And I went and I created a catalog of roughly 100 records with Ernest Franklin, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, Rita Coolidge, Paul Williams, Willie Nelson, just whoever would make themselves available and who could perform their music live. The traditional way that records have been done, that I certainly learned, was punching in and overdubbing, adding a whole lot of parts to a basic track until you then finally get to the mixing stage. Because these records were projects that had already been recorded, essentially, everybody knew what to play. So we go in and John Gorka comes and plays his tunes with a mandolin player and a bass player and a couple of background singers, piano, and we capture that as a live performance.
So it's one take, essentially.
It's one take. Look, we would take them a couple of times, but it's basically a one pass through. You'd play from beginning to end. And somebody would say, thumbs up. We didn't even stop and went in and go in and listen. If everybody was good with that take, then we moved on, because we made a whole album in 3 or 4 hours. All these albums were made. We've been in a single session down at the Colburn School where we did most of these recordings with an acoustic, reverb time of 1.8 seconds, real reverb, and a beautiful 9-foot Steinway piano, and a background that we could light and shoot with video. We would make 3 records in a day. I'd book the place a couple of days, and we'd make 4 or 5 records during those couple of sessions. Sometimes they went a little bit longer than others, but Emil Richards, the percussionist, who's the late Emil Richards, and his big band, we were done in an hour and a half. I mean,
that's crazy.
He knew exactly what they do. It took more time to set it up. So I captured all these projects with production values that I adopted that were dedicated to the audiophile sensibility, which meant, in my mind, that yes, I did adopt 96K 24-bit PCM as the recording methodology. I used benchmark preamps. I used the best microphones. I used, a straight signal path. I didn't use any limiters, no compressors, dynamic processors at all. If it played loud, they played loud. It played soft, they played soft. They had dynamic range. That's the big thing that misses in most music as a former mastering engineer. I used no equalization. If a guitar was thin and trebly, it was thin and trebly for a reason, and that's how I captured it. They wanted a full-bodied, big, sound. They'd get a jumbo Gibson or something like that and play. And I used real reverb. The reverb that's on these tracks was that which was produced in the space, which was a chamber music auditorium. So I accepted a whole bunch of parameters that I felt, as a musician myself, would lend itself to more realistic, better sounding recordings. And I labeled those high resolution because of the 96K 24-bit stuff. And people really liked what they heard. I mean, I mixed those records on my DVD disc. I never made CDs, but I put them on DVD discs and made them available both in stereo and in surround. I'm a big fan of surround. I think it's far more impactful to move from stereo to surround than it is to move from 44.1 to 96K, for example. Yeah. And so I put 2 surround mixes on there. One that was very aggressive, puts you right in the middle of the band, with drums on the right side and piano on the left side and so on. I call that a stage mix. Or you can also listen from the audience perspective, in which ambience in the hall is basically placed in the left and right surround speakers. So it was kind of, have it your way. I mean, you take your pick as to how you want to listen to things, and that kind of future-proofs things and lets people, slowly, I think, migrate away from stereo into immersive surround, which is now all the rage with the spatial audio that Apple and Dolby and some of these other people are doing.
That's super cool. Now, when we're talking about audio DVDs, is it audio DVDs or is it
DVD video was what we started with in 1997.
Okay.
And my company actually produced the very first ones for release in the United States on March 19th of 1997, before there were any DVDs around and no players available. But DVD video uses compressed multi-channel audio, Dolby Digital, or optionally DTS. Or you can have stereo PCM, even high resolution stereo PCM. But because that takes such a big footprint, they didn't use that against the movies, because the movie was the primary.
The big piece.
But there were people that used DVD video format, got rid of the picture, just put a slide up there. High Res Records, a partner of mine, and I did that. Hobson did it with DVD audio disc. He called it DAD, where they would transfer old analog tapes into the digital format at 96 or even 192 and sell those on disc without the video component. But that's limited to stereo. It wasn't then until they said, well, that really worked out well. We've really made VHS obsolete with this DVD format. It worked really well. The players are out there. Let's go again and see if we can't upgrade from CD quality to the next standard, which was DVD audio. And DVD audio says, okay, great. You can have video in a video sector of that disc if you want, but the primary thing is to put audio. So they put out feelers for a request for proposal in the late 90s to a variety of tech companies. Said, we've got basically 13 megabits per second of bandwidth. That's 96K, 24 bits, 6 channels. Yeah. We want to get all that back through the mechanism of putting it on this spinning disk. And since that bandwidth multiplies out to 13.94 megabits per second, and a DVD disc only goes up to 10, we had to have some compression technology in order to get it to fit in the container and have the bandwidth available to deliver it seamlessly. So this RFP went out to Panasonic, went out to a bunch of people. One of the people it went out to was Meridian in the UK of MQA fame. And they have some very smart people there. And they said, okay, great. We're going to offer our technology up. And that's where Meridian Lossless Packing, MLP, came in, that made this 13 losslessly compressible down to below the DVD audio threshold.
So it could fit on the disc.
So it could be played back on the disc, exactly. And so MLP became the standard for DVD audio, which meant all those hundreds of thousands of DVD video players that were out there already, which did not have the MLP playback decoding chip in it, had to be replaced for the DVD audio standard.
So could that, like, I'm thinking of the time. I remember getting my first DVD player as a family, like mid 2000s kind of thing. But I didn't really know about audio DVDs. Was it this MLP piece of it that really caused the downfall of DVD audio, or never the uptick, I should say? It never really gained that popularity? It
was a couple of things. If you think back on it, the people at Philips and Sony and Thomson and a couple of other companies back in the late 70s and early 80s were the ones that came up with the IP, the intellectual property behind the CD audio disc, which made them billions of dollars in royalties. Yeah. One format, it took over. Everybody had to have it. You make hardware, you deliver software, and you got a royalty piece on all those things. So along comes the DVD video, which is a different set of companies. Warner Brothers and Toshiba and others were involved in that standard. When they start then turning their focus towards DVD audio or the music business, Sony and Philips said, wait a minute. We've been getting our more than our lion's share of the revenue off of this thing. We don't want to share with DVD audio. That's a technology under the DVD form that Toshiba and Warner Brothers and PCM and the rest of it. So we'll come up with our own standard. That's when they hatched SACD, a 1-bit.
Okay.
And so we had competition. We had a format war much akin to the beta VHS
HD, DVD, video. Blu-ray, that kind of history repeats itself.
Yeah, they did, and Sony was not going to lose on this because they had lost it at the beta war and they lost it at SACD. So the Blu-ray finally became their thing. But at the time, SACD and DVD audio were launched around the same time. I remember seeing it in 1999 at a show in Chicago, an SACD player under glass. Wasn't playing anything. It was $20,000 or $5,000. I think it was $5,000. And there was no software for it, but they wanted to get to market to take that royalty stream again. So we had this DVD audio war. Even though the honest truth is DSD technology as a deliverable is highly flawed, and there will be people out there that write nasty grams back to you guys saying, no, that's not true at all. Well, it is true. And so, PCM audio, high resolution PCM audio is far more capable. It's from a production point of view, you can do stuff with it. You can't do anything with DSD because it's 1 bit. How do you adjust dynamics on a 1-bit word? Well, you put it in an 8-bit word and then it becomes multi-bit. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of shenanigans that went along the way. But DVD audio and my discs failed. except especially, amongst the public, but audiophiles that had and gone out to get an Oppo or get a multi-channel, multi-format universal player that would play all disc formats, CDs, DVDs. Even now the new ones play Blu-rays. So those physical players from Oppo and others that would play every disc and had the chips in there necessary for DTS and Dolby and would play the PCM, of course, and MLP, that became the standard for the audiophile market. And I'd stand at tables and say, have you got an Oppo player? And, 8 out of 10 times people say, sure, I do. And that'll play everything that certainly I made and that Sony and Philips and the people that were adherents to DSD made as well. So you had the best of both. But it wasn't very long thereafter that because of the war and the failure of those two formats, really, that streaming started to come into play and file-based delivery. And so we moved, certainly David Chesky and his brother Norm and I and others, Chad Kasem and so forth, we all started looking at downloads as the solution. So if you're not going to buy a disc from me, I will sell you the file as a downloaded file that you can play on your music server. I mean, an iPod is a music server. It's just a very
portable,
personal,
yeah.
But there were very expensive Kaleidoscape and others made big, systems that were many tens of thousands of dollars, music servers for the audiophile, because you couldn't stream audiophile quality. They would instead allow you to download the files. And so I set up in 2007 the first, I believe, high resolution download site called itrax.com, itrax.com, which still exists. And all of the files and all the mixes, not the videos, but the audio files are downloadable as my master. They're PCM, files and 96K 24-bit, and you get to choose whether you want a wave or a FLAC or a surround mix or stereo mix. And so you can pull those down and play them, on your system, your music server. You can play them on a smartphone, for crying out loud. But they take up a lot of space, a lot more space. So you have this dilemma of more tunes and less quality, less fidelity, or fewer tunes and no compromise fidelity. And can you tell the difference? So, the trade-off generally has been that we'll take lesser quality and have my entire catalog, sitting on a 32 gig hard drive.
Well, it's interesting because I think of the masses and like even me getting my first iPod and kind of being introduced to all this stuff. At the time, I was trying to fill up my 1 gig iPod. I was like, where can I get all this music? Okay, like download from iTunes. Like, how quickly can I fill this thing up? Quality at the time was never a consideration for me. Could have been partly the music I was listening to, because you don't think of like punk rock or heavy metal or whatever as needing to have that high fidelity recording or not as much. Like some of that grunge and the clipping and stuff is almost part of the sound to a degree. Sure. But as I've gotten older, the quality of the recording has become more and more important for me. So it's interesting to think that the masses really kind of start with this lower quality and they accept that. Eventually they get sold on higher quality, and there has to be something that kind of entices them to move that way. Where it seems like for the audiophiles, the recording standards and the kind of quality levels that were established in the mid 2000s are pretty much the same today. Like the 96 24-bit. I know there's more, but is there a difference, or is that diminishing returns? Like, are you actually getting anything else out of that?
Well, it's interesting you touch on that, because that was the epiphany that look, I was the biggest advocate, one of the biggest advocates, certainly at the 2000 when DVD audio came around, and I started building this catalog of high resolution recordings, native high res recordings, as opposed to taking an old analog tape and putting it in a larger container and calling it high res. That was the issue of provenance, and why I got myself kicked off the high-end audio board at the CEA, because they were making stuff up in order to sell more recordings and more equipment. So it dawned on me after investing millions of dollars and thousands of hours of my time and my team's time and so forth, that these are really great sounding recordings. And what is it that makes them really great sounding recordings? Is it because I gather the entire ensemble onto a stage with a real reverb and don't compress and don't EQ and use a great piano and record everybody at the same time? Or is it because it's recorded at a sampling rate of 96K and 24-bit words? Is it because I don't master the records and do anything dynamically at the last stage? I spent 13 years mastering records for people from Bad Company and the Allman Brothers and Kiss and the rest of them. And, every single time, the story I tell with Paul Rogers, the lead singer of Bad Company and very famous rock and roll voice, he was in the studio. He was in the mastering studio with me. And we made a record, Merchants of Cool, a DVD with him and his band. And his producer came down from, I think they were in Vancouver or something. And we sat there for the day mastering this record, and it sounded great. It sounded really great. And so we thought. And so he signed off, the producer signed off. We sent it back to the record company. And they said, nope, not loud enough.
Not loud enough. The loudness wars.
Not loud enough. So we did it again. I did it again, and I compressed more, and I turned up the volume, and we adopted things like normalization, which keeps it just legal in the 16 bits or whatever it was on the disc we were dealing with. I did that 5 times. They came back and said it's not loud enough until there was no music left. And so I gave up. That's when I stopped mastering. I said, this is not conducive to the music. It certainly works for making the loudest records that come through the radio. Maybe that sells more, and why people are engaged by that over compression, ultra maximizer, and the other tools that we've learned how to use. And people, Andrew Sheps brags about making a Metallica record that's 18 dB over the standard. It's certainly part of that loudness wars things. But I went back and I began to doubt the advocacy that I had so strongly expressed during CEA meetings and on my blog and in addresses that I would give at the various conferences and so forth. And I said, okay, let's put it to the test. I'm a professor, so occasionally you can get a break from your teaching load and a sabbatical, which is a wonderful thing. Yeah. If you've got a research project, and I was encouraged to apply for a sabbatical, and I did, and I got one. This was back in 2017, I think. I said, look, the research that's been done, Meyer Moran and others, weren't using high-resolution sources. So how can you determine whether somebody can hear a high-resolution recording and distinguish between that and a standard resolution recording, a CD quality recording, if they don't use those to start with?
Yeah.
Instead of using, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road or another track that was sold commercially by Sony or by whatever record company that was derived from an analog tape, which wasn't high resolution in the beginning. The provenance was standard resolution because it's analog tape, which is less fidelity than a CD. And if we put it in a 96K 24-bit DVD audio bucket, does it magically get better fidelity? It doesn't. Yeah. So, and I faulted them for that and other studies that were concluding that nobody could tell the difference. Well, because you hadn't ever played anything that had any difference. So instead, knowing that I have a catalog of 1,000 tracks from classical and pop and guitar, acoustic, folk, etc., country music even, I said, well, I'll in my sabbatical, I will make available 20 tracks, a variety of tracks, sort of across the genres and vocal and instrumental and all sorts of other things. And I will convert them, the native 9624 high-res files, down to CD quality, 44.1, 16 bits, stereo. And the high-res ones were the stereo ones too. I didn't mess with the surround stuff. Yeah. And I made sure that they were exactly the same length. Everything was, except that last octave was gone. Everything from 22K or roughly 20K on up was missing from the CD and was still there in the high resolution version. And I randomly, named them A or B, and made them available through my blog to my readers. And so they were invited to please download them, play them anytime you want, anywhere you want, headphones. Just don't cheat. Don't look at them. There are tools that are very easily, you pull them into Adobe and you see the spectrum, you see it chopped off at 20K. And they were, look, I understand that's a flaw. If people are going to be dishonest in something like taking a survey on high resolution audio, then we're really sunk. But whatever. I got 8,000 data points back. Now, Meyer and Moran had 60 people. There's other studies that have done 20-somethings and so forth. There were 8,000 data points that I got back from these 40, from the thousands of people that downloaded the files, and I don't know, 700 or 800 of them responded with the form. It said 4 questions. A is the high resolution. B is the high resolution. I can't tell, or I'm not going to participate in this because it's not the genre that I know, or some other thing. And I had a statistician who was one of my readers go through this, Bob, went through it, and we established pretty definitively that the null proposition of can you tell was confirmed. Nobody could tell. There were a few people who did better than others, but in general, it was just no better than tossing a coin.
No way.
Which meant, okay, great. So my life has been pointless, and I wasted.
You've learned a lot along the way.
And I learned a lot along the way, but here I am, all these years later now. I put that out. It was an AES paper. People with vested interests were, it was highly flawed because it wasn't done in the studio, and you gave people the chance. They probably cheated, and so all those people that are pushing for the marketing of high resolution audio felt obliged to really trash my paper. But this is real world. These are people, my peers, the audiophiles of the world can't tell the difference. Maybe the scientific community cares about something else. But now if you go to my AIX Records YouTube channel, I am prominently displaying the high-res audio logo on the sort of still card that precedes each one of the albums that I'm putting up.
Yeah.
And people will quibble and say, well, wait a minute, YouTube doesn't deliver high-resolution audio. They compress and they push it out. But if they're recorded in high-resolution audio, I captured these natively in high-resolution audio. So what makes the difference? If, in fact, we can't tell the difference between a CD quality and a native high-resolution recording, then there's no reason to give you the extra bandwidth other than to feel good. 2, YouTube can deliver virtually CD quality. Yeah. But the fidelity is baked into the production, not in the delivery container. If I have the dynamic range intact from the time that I made Rita Coolidge singing higher and higher, and I don't master that record, and I don't compress the dynamics on the drums or limiter or do some other games with EQ, and I deliver the sound that was present in that room at the time, that's what I'm capable of delivering through the YouTube channel. And I think they do sound better. They do sound more rich and have greater fidelity because they're not mastered, because they were produced with high fidelity in mind from the production point, and are then obviously limited by whatever the distribution channel is. But if you adopt the standards that are requested by the record companies, like the people that released the Bad Company DVD all those years ago, they've already decided, and so has Warner Brothers and Sony and Universal and the rest of them, that the louder records sell more. Therefore, we want to produce louder records. So they do. And they hire mastering engineers, and those mastering engineers have gotten very adept with the latest digital tools at making things sound loud all the time. That's not musically appropriate from my perspective. There's a picture in my book, Music and Audio, A User Guide to Better Sound, where I took a very dynamic Lawrence Joubert acoustic guitar track, and I then mastered it with varying 5/4. One was no compression at all, with varying levels of compression and dynamics limiting, which basically takes the high components and brings them down by some ratio, 2, 4, 6, 8 to 1, some 20 to 1. It brings those down. So it gets flatter and flatter and flatter and flatter. That's step 1. Step 2 then is to normalize that file. So those essentially start sounding quieter, although there's no dynamics anymore. They're universally mezzo forte. They're right in the middle of the dynamic range because I'm bringing down the peaks, the louder sections that cross over a certain threshold. Then there's a technology or a process called normalize. Normalize says, I know that my bucket is 16 bits or 24 bits deep. Yeah. I want to find the loudest sample in amongst the Lawrence Juber track, and I'm going to identify that in pass one of this normalizing process, where I find I've got one that's 26,000, and all the rest of them are below that. So I know that the peak in that file is 26,000. If I know that I can get to, I'm making up numbers here, 50,000, I'm going to add 30,000 to that and every other sample and raise not the fidelity, but I'm going to raise the volume of the entire track. Now remember, I just squashed all of the vertical differentiation, all the dynamic range out through compression. Yeah. Then you normalize it. It goes up, and now it looks like a brick. And that's what we get in 90% of the audio that you listen to through the radio, through Sirius XM, through the disc that you buy, not generally through the LPs, which might be a reason why LPs actually do so well.
Are coming back in popularity.
Oh, yeah. They sell more than they do CDs. Yeah. But the reason is because we're producing things at the outset, according to the mandates of the record labels, that lack fidelity. And there's strategic reasons for that, because they know that it sells more. My record is louder than yours, and therefore you're going to buy it. So for the audiophile sensibility, you have to adopt the fact that it's going to be quieter. You're going to have to turn up the volume after you've been listening to a Kiss record all afternoon. You're going to have to turn up the volume to listen to Lawrence Juber, because there's dynamic range in there, and most of the mid-range volume that he plays is quieter than the quietest sections of the Kiss record.
That's really interesting. So essentially, for the audiophiles, they might not be getting in the standard day-to-day recordings what the artist actually sounds like, so much as what the record labels know sells more.
Exactly true. Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to hold on to that thought. I have some more questions, but for right now, we're just going to go take a little break. And when we jump back in, we can kind of kick off from there. The audiophile is actually after? Are they looking to get as close to the musician as possible and how the musician sounds in real life? Or are they looking to get the kind of most out of their speaker system, the most out of what their equipment can reproduce? And that's kind of like the line of questioning that I was going to go down is by the sounds of it, the stuff that you're recording and how you're recording it is to get as close to the actual musician in the room as possible, not necessarily get the most out of their speaker systems, if that makes sense.
Well, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. When you talk about the capabilities of equipment, we talk about distortion specification, we talk about speed and wow and flutter and talk about dynamic range, the ability to reproduce louds and soft both. We talk about the accuracy of the speaker diffusing into the room so that you're on track without having losing frequencies because you're off axis on speakers and so forth. All those things are the hardware people work really, really hard to reproduce the content that the record companies and engineers like myself create. So your system is only going to be, the only limits to your system right now is the fidelity that's in the software or the music that you play through that system. The limiting factor is the disc, is the file, is the material that's being delivered through those speakers and so on. So look, you can invest $100,000 in a set of speakers and they're flat to 40 kilohertz and they have a wide diffusion pattern and they're time aligned and all that other stuff. But if you put a crap record in there, if you put a recording, it's going to reproduce that crap with 100% fidelity. So it's from audiophiledom in my world is I want to make sure that the sit down listen experience brings that which music can do, which is to communicate intellectual and emotional stimulation. I have a recording of Jennifer Warren's titled "So Sad" that unfortunately I can't release it. She won't let me. She has re-recorded it, and the recorded version that she's put out, I think, pales in comparison to the one that I have. But it's a guaranteed, tug at your heartstrings every time you hear it. It's just really a beautiful, very sad song performed by one of the artists, true genius singers of the 20th century, Jennifer Warren. So it's a fabulous recording. I have the same thing from, other artists, or you listen to a Stravinsky Firebird Suite, it's just incomparable to me to any other art form. I mean, you have this dynamism, you have this emotion. So if I can connect you with that, which means I have to capture it, and then you have to be able to deliver it.
Yeah.
So the question is to have a really great fidelity recording played through crap speakers. Is that preferable to having a crap recording played through really great speakers? I have a friend who lives in the neighborhood, and we went to watch. I watched the Lakers lose another basketball game the other afternoon, and she's playing my AIX John Gorka recording, which is sitting here on the desk. I finished his yesterday. I Saw a Stranger with Your Hair, or Always, or Blue Chalk, that tracks on his record, through basically just streaming through a small desktop speaker setup that's not stereo or anything, and it sounded really great. The emotion, the connection, the dynamic range was present even in this $200 playback device. So in my estimation, it's far more important. In fact, it's singularly the most important component in your entire system is to have a really great recording. And sadly, most recordings are not great recordings. There are many really, really, really good recordings, but in the audiophile world, we don't have access to the latest, greatest pop records and so forth to produce in the ways that we want. Yeah. They're produced according to the formulas that make Taylor Swift and others, millions and millions of dollars. That's unfortunate. It's sad. That's why the audiophile sort of set apart from that. But people get so, entranced by cost, by advice from so-called experts that's ill-placed, by the myth of snake oil cables and $8,000 power connectors to the wall. I mean, all that stuff is a bunch of hocus pocus, and I've shown it. But they continue to fund these companies. One of those that we talked about, offline, was this whole MQA thing. The same people behind Meridian lossless packing over in Great Britain, who came up with this really brilliant way of losslessly compressing that multi-channel audio down. They since licensed that when it came out on the Blu-ray to Dolby, and Dolby calls it Dolby True HD. They've enhanced it. They've added more channels and made it a very mature codec, but it's still physically based off of a disc. On Blu-rays, I play a Blu-ray every once in a while. I got a bunch of them in front of me here, but that's again, as we said, the death of discs and physical media warrants. Well, what do we do? That's not a format that's going to be streamed or delivered. So very cleverly, I think to make up with some really deficit years of negative growth, if that's such a term, in the world of Meridian, the opportunity, as was very clearly pointed out by the head of that company, is in streaming. So let's keep the streaming revenue piece through this thing called MQA. We'll use.
So what does MQA actually stand for?
Master Quality Authenticated.
Okay.
And it was it's basically described as a technology, a technique that you encode during a mastering session, and you can get all this high frequency stuff and fold it with origami technology down underneath the bandwidth that you do have, and then you can expand it back out. It's all BS. It was a complete snow job and sales pitch. A lot of people, for reasons I failed to understand, including many in the press, bought into it and then said, "Oh my gosh, this is the most revolutionary, beautiful thing I've ever heard." Well, it's not, and thankfully, those of us, I think, who argued against it, including some really smart people that I know, from Benchmark and others, they've gone into receivership now. So they've basically, the world has recognized that with sufficient bandwidth, we can give you the entire file all the way out to 96K 24-bit streaming without having to compress it into this MQA or any other codec. That's probably the revelation that I've had over the last couple of weeks. One of the programmers at Sonic Solutions, the digital audio workstation maker, back in 1990, whatever it was, 89, when I started editing discs for CD release, using their tools on a Mac. He's still around and started SoundBlade to take over the Sonic Solution stuff. And he has now come up with, I found this thing through a connection on Facebook, and turned out to be Jonathan Reichbach, and a thing called Artist Connection. Now, it is possible today, with the bandwidth that most of us have available in the urban areas, to get lossless 96K 24-bit audio. I know I was arguing against that before, but if you can get it, why not? It doesn't hurt, certainly doesn't hurt anything. We can stream that now into a portable device, into your cell phone, into your receiver, into your Apple set-top box. You can get high-resolution audio. The choices, however, are being made not to offer that to people because bandwidth is expensive. If it costs me $40 to service you with high-resolution streaming in your place, and I'm only charging you $15 a month, I'm going in the whole $35 or $25 a month. Yeah. Not a good thing. So the reality is, we now have the technology. The bandwidth has caught up to the point where I can deliver my tracks in surround, in high resolution, with video. It's like YouTube on steroids.
So is there going to be a next physical medium that takes over?
There's no point. Whether we've got 4K or 8K video, it's just, that's not how consumers have decided they want to experience their media. They want it anytime, any place. They're willing to watch a movie on a small screen of their smartphone, etc. And likewise, they're willing to listen through in-ear monitors or headphones or through their sound bars, or for those of us who are big on multiple speakers and surround, they'll send that through. But it again is a matter of getting that material from a source that says it's not a shelf. I don't have to occupy half of my room with LPs or CDs or cassettes or anything else. Blu-rays, DVDs. I can get any track in ultimate fidelity, with or without, surround, with or without video, anytime I want. We've reached Oz. I mean, we're here. We've got the solution because of the technology has finally caught up. It is incumbent, I think, on those artists, those record labels, those producers and engineers to say, we now have this entire fidelity field to play with. Let's make high fidelity recordings available to consumers. And you can do that by saying, okay, we're gonna put metadata in the file that says, please turn on compression because I'm listening to this in the car while I'm out jogging. And in the circumstance where we're listening at home and it's quiet in our environment late at night, and we want real fidelity, we're listening to classical music or jazz or something else that deserves it, let's turn off that metadata that says squash it dynamically and give you the full fidelity. We can do that today. That's interesting. But the record labels will not. That doesn't make them more money. So, plus, what they would probably do is say, okay, each one of these is a different SKU. We're going to have to pay the royalties twice. So
pay to unlock that functionality.
That's right. So we've really reached the point where there's no need for physical media anymore. Unless you're a collector and really feel good about walking up to the cabinet, I mean, getting one of my Blu-ray discs and pulling it off the shelf and saying, I'm going to enjoy the video and surround music with me sitting in the middle of the band. We can do that through a stream now. And we didn't used to be able to do that.
That's very cool. So, Mark, we're coming to the end of our time. The one last question I have is, for you, enjoying music, what would be the soundtrack to your life that you would put on? Or what would be the songs that you would actually listen to just sit back, relax, and enjoy a musical experience?
Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach. Maybe it's the Italian Concerto, maybe it's the Art of Fugue. I just find the nonstop intellectual stimulation of listening to a piece of counterpoint as imagined and realized by Bach to be the most satisfying to me. It's not overly emotional. It's, you know, it stimulates the intellectual side. When I started studying music seriously, as opposed to being a 3-chord guitar player, even a jazz guitar player in college and high school, to discover even just the first invention of Bach and realize that, you know, you take 8 notes and you build a whole 32 measure composition around it by turning it upside down, playing it backwards, playing it, you know, half the speed and twice the speed. It's called composition, not songwriting, for a reason. So musically, for me, I certainly enjoy the reggae of Ernest Wrangler, the songs of John Gorka, but they're in a different category in terms of their artistic merit to me. They hit their bullet points right on, but for me, since I discovered Bach and played some, I'm still working on the first invention, even here now, trying to get it back under my fingers. But that's music that just is as close to perfection as I've ever imagined.
Oh, that's awesome. So in wrapping up, if people are looking to learn more about your work, learn more about your views, kind of listen to some of your recordings, where can they find out more? Where can they learn more?
Well, the commercial goes something like this. I started in 2013 a blog at realhd-audio.com. I wrote well over 1,000 blog posts pretty much every day for a number of years, built up a pretty good following. I had some struggles medically and personally over the last couple of years, so I hadn't really written and participated, but I'm kind of back on that. The catalog of recordings in physical format, if you want, really stick to discs, and I have some. The racks behind me still have some of these discs that I can send out. That's at AIXrecords.com. That's my record label. Yep. The download site is iTrax.com, where you can just simply buy the tracks and have them downloaded to your device, whatever. They're yours, and keep a record of it. So if you lose that hard drive, you can always get more. The book, The Music and Audio A User Guide to Better Sound, was a Kickstarter campaign from 2017. 900-page book, which still is very relevant advice on how to pick equipment, how to buy, what's important about music that we should support with the fidelity of both the production stuff and what we do with distribution and listing. It was a very successful book. Comes with a Blu-ray disc if you want the Blu-ray disc, or a set of files that shows you what high-resolution music is, what the difference is between a mastered and a non-mastered track, or one that's done in this various mixing audience perspective or stereo versus stage perspective 5.1. Working on a new book. It's called The User Guide to Streaming Downloads of Personal Audio. That should be out hopefully this summer, which was the second book that I am coining. And the new thing right now, which, you know, to be the next YouTube tycoon, I mean, it takes a lot of hits to make a couple of bucks. I think I'm over $5 in profit now after working like a dog for 2 weeks uploading my catalog. But the YouTube channel is AIX Records. And I will be putting up there little vignettes on music theory, what's important about, you know, scales and rhythm, and how to listen critically to music, what's important in terms of recording technologies and so forth, as I begin to build out this channel. But I'm putting up, you know, it takes me several days to get an album up, but I'm putting those records up in stereo. I've got John Gorka and Dave Mason, Rita Coolidge is going up right now, Ernest Wrangler, Albert Lee, very prominent country picking guitar players up there already. So I'm going to make my stuff available. Look, I'm retiring from the university. I don't do this because I have to worry about the income generated by my catalog. I would like to make it available, let people become aware of the fact that fidelity does still exist, and that you can find it and you can get it online. This latest wrinkle I haven't really explored too heavily yet, but Artist Connection, this thing I mentioned that Jonathan Reichbach is doing, where we will be able to stream high resolution in multi-channel with video, is upcoming, and we're still trying to figure out exactly how those value propositions are going to work. Would people pay $100 a month to stream, 4K lossless surround sound? Maybe not. We'll find out.
Very cool. Awesome. It's been an absolute pleasure, Mark. Thank you so much, and looking forward to chatting with you in the future sometime.
Thanks very much, Jorden. I appreciate the opportunity.
All the best, everyone. Take care.